Okay, hello and welcome everyone to the Cartographer community meeting today, October 27th, and let me bring with the agenda. There you go. Okay. Well, again, welcome everyone, and remember that the agenda is open for you to edit, add any topic you may have for this session. Okay, so for this not only for this session, but for the agenda, for the structure itself, the agenda, we added a new section replacing another section that we didn't use last time. And I call it the TLDR, the purpose to give a really short overview on what the team is doing right now, what changed in the project during this week, and so that way the community uh, we'll get a proper starting point to this conversation. So I will ask Joshua to please tell us what's new this week and what is the team working on.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, David. So the most exciting thing that we did this week was we shipped 007. It's our latest release, and the exciting bits from that release are that we added a delivery mechanism to enable GitOps workflows. So if you have more information about what that looks like, feel free to check out the RFC, which I've linked in the docs here. And this release also has a couple breaking changes to be aware of. So the big ones is that we renamed the components block to resources in the supply chain. And we're making the run template in pipeline cluster scoped. And that's just to better align with some of the other templates from supply chain. So yeah, if you're upgrading, just be wary of those two breaking changes. So yeah, that's what we've been up to.
Thank you, Josh. And what is the team working on right now for the upcoming days?
Yeah, so after the big release, yeah, we're planning some new features. A lot of what we're working on is actually available in our roadmap as well, which I'll link to. Yeah, just in the short term, we're just looking at adding some more features to delivery, which will let you promote a deployment. So right now, you can basically like once you finish your deployment, it's just about like enabling additional workflows that I'll let you to run checks against that deployment. Another big thing we're working on is we're looking at renaming the pipeline service component. So there's another story related to that, which I'll link to in the notes as well. Still taking some feedback. Right now we're pretty much settled on the idea of renaming pipeline to runnable. But yeah, nothing's been changed yet. So if there's any other feedback, feel free to make some comments on that story. So yeah, those are the two big things we got coming up. Yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Awesome. Thank you, Joshua. That's great. Okay. Also, I added a short section on follow-up on action items from previous meeting. So we had a couple. I see for the adding, logging, and error handling. I see that some created an issue for that. So thank you. We will be able to do a proper follow-up with this issue. It also has the proposed solution. So yeah, thank you for that. If you out there have some comments on this or ideas, feel free to add it there. Okay. Thank you, Emily. Source versus sources. Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah,
David.
regarding
The chat is not related to what you're talking about, but sorry.
no problem. So regarding RFCs, I don't know if someone from you we'll have an RFC to come and discuss, or we can skip that.
Just to bring it up, so Resh, I deleted RFC 13 out of here because the main point was we didn't know how to handle a single source versus multiple sources for the delivery workflow. And I think we've talked about that out of band.
Well, I think there needs to be, I have been bouncing around internally. So it's something I need to share with the open source community. Using stricter typing for resources in a supply chain, same within the delivery, so that we can actually have a source versus sources and
Right.
have it be sensibly typed. So if there's no more to talk about on that right now, I'll try to make sure that we do have a proposal for that in an RFC, maybe that RFC.
Yeah, I think
in the
that
future.
that would be a better discussion than the small question that we had before.
Okay.
So
Cool.
I think it may make sense to maybe not this meeting, but maybe next week or at some point do like an open discussion of the open RFCs. Like for context, we're jumping into like RFC 10 and 13, etc. But we've never really discussed openly the other RFCs that exist. And I know we've kind of talked about them as a team, but I think it would be great just for, you know, transparency's sake to say, okay, these are the things, these are the like big ideas that we're working on. These are kind of when we believe that they'll land, etc. So while we're talking about RFCs here, I think it'd be great to add an action item for maybe the next meeting to look at that. What do you think?
Yeah, if we can just keep it to a quick overview on that one, because they're too easy to dive deep on.
That makes sense. So maybe adding an action item. I'll add an action item there to do that next meeting.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
I think there was a new RFC this week that we probably should have popped in here, but I never got a chance to look at it. I think a new one has turned up. So let's make sure that that one's in for the agenda for next week.
Okay. Yeah, I believe it was RFC
Should be 14.
14. Yeah,
Yeah, no, a brand new one. Sorry.
okay.
Yeah.
In this RFC section, do we want to discuss any of the new RFCs? Like, is that the intent, or are we just adding RFCs that we want to talk about? I believe it should be the former, right? Like, should it be any new RFCs? Yeah.
I think it should be both.
Well,
There should be an agenda to discuss the RFCs that we need to carry forward, but we should also make sure we review anything added. And that's why I asked about the new one. Why it's not here this week, and that's fine. Let's just
I don't
make
think
sure
it's actually
in there
been
next week.
pushed yet. I think the number's just
placeholder?
reserved.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, that explains that. Cool.
it would be probably great to ask the author of RFC 14 to join this session as well.
Okay, I'll make sure to invite him.
Great idea.
Yeah, let me put that as an action item here.
I just add,
Yeah, thank you.
I volunteered you to update the template. Hopefully that's okay.
Yeah, for sure. There you go. That's great. Okay, there is not anything else for RFCs. We can move to the open mic discussion. Well, seems like mine is the first one. So I wanted to introduce the Common Infrastructure Initiative, I believe. Yeah, Common Core Infrastructure Initiative. This is a program by Linux Foundation. And the goal is to provide a standardized way to certify that open source projects out there follow a baseline of best practices on different topics. And depending on how much of these criteria we meet, we earn the passing level or silver level or gold level. So if we see here, for example, it's in the goal level. We have, for example, Node.js only has passing level, but we have, for example, the Linux kernel. It's in the gold tier, obviously, and Perl and many other packages and software we use every day. So we have a section here for Cartographer, a section that I started. This program works in a it's a self certifying thing, because we enter the information. Some of the information is automatically retrieved from the repo, and the remaining is entered by whoever owns this page. I actually own this page. So I'm getting started. I'm adding the stuff that I know, that I'm aware of. That there are some domains here that I haven't touched so far, and I'll be sharing with you the progress and sharing with the community the progress on this until we get at least the passing level grade, and we can add the batch to the repo. So it means that for anyone out there, that this project follows a common baseline of best practices. So, for example, one of the unmet criteria right now is we cannot find release notes in the repo, right? There is no change log, some other form of release notes that the human can understand out there what's new and what's important from this release. So that's something we'll need to discuss, how to handle this. Release notes. I know that GitHub now has some features to automatically generate. We'll need to see how to handle this. And well, there will be several other domains that I will be discussing with you all, and to see how can we meet these criteria. I just wanted to share this with you because we consider it important, and we'll be making progress on this, and also with the community. Any questions from this?
What's the advantage to having the different levels? It's just like we meet these criteria, or is there any kind of tangible advantage?
Regarding the VMware open source policies, we need to have a passing level criteria, and it has some meaning for the community. We don't earn anything. I mean, there are no direct benefits from this. It's more what users get out of this. For example, with better release notes, well, we will have more users that have clear information on what's new and why this new release is important, right? So at least getting the passing level criteria is something that is considered necessary for open source projects under the VMware umbrella. But with the progress of silver and gold level, touch on several security topics. So it will be great. It's not the goal at this point, but it will be great for the future to consider one of those tiers.
And you could get a nice badge on the README as well.
And
nice.
Yeah, it's a nice badge. It's a nice badge in the README. Yeah, it's.
Well, if we get a nice badge, I mean, why are we not yet gold yet already?
In all seriousness, though, like, it's nice to have a well groomed list of criteria that makes your project more attractive. So
Yeah.
So I'm all for it. And I just like to put my hand up for helping with the analysis section of this, because we have been talking about static and dynamic code analysis, and I'd love to get some feedback too on what tooling should work. We were thinking of using SonarQube, but it does talk about using Floss, and so I'd like to know what's available in the Floss domain for us to ensure that we meet those criteria and that we get good feedback on code quality, make our reviews easier. It will make it easier for us to be consistent. So my hand's up for that if you need to find someone to talk to about it.
Thank
Just
you.
on that
Yeah.
note, I know that we have done some nice integration with SonarQube Cloud. I think they do like free service for open source projects, which is kind of nice. But there is a little, I know that recent other tooling services, SaaS services, CodeCov, I think had some fairly horrendous security issues as well. So it's recent of last year. So it's probably, yeah, it's one of those, how they get implemented. But yeah, having that kind of stuff analysis and also like is really nice.
Yeah, I think what I struggled with was knowing that these, because also for the CNCF criteria, they want us to use common open source tooling for these things, and it's hard to find a list for Go of good tooling that isn't, in my opinion, weak vet tools that don't seem to do the job very well. So the only thing I found that worked was SonarQube, and I don't know whether being available for open source is the same as being open source in itself, and if it's open source enough for it to satisfy these. So I'd like to dive in on that, make sure we're using a tool that will meet this thing's criteria and the CNCF ones.
Yeah, for sure. This is just the beginning of that journey. So yeah, it's nice to get started.
I think it's a great opportunity to dog food these tools with integration or with Cartographer as well, right? So whatever we pick there, I think it should be a focus to make sure that it works in our own thing.
You're saying because we're a supply chain. Makes sense.
That makes sense. Absolutely. Great, thank you. Okay, I see this one here. This goes on a reference in templates. I don't know who's this.
Yep, that's me. I just threw that up
Oh, okay.
there. And I just want to start the discussion because I know there's going to be some to and throwing on this, but it's a new issue, and I think it's significant enough to need to talk about an architectural choice here. But there's no rush for it. And it's just that in our templates, we can write a template, and the template can be consumed by either a delivery or by a supply chain. However, when consumed by either, we expose one of the templating values we expose is either the workload or the delivery. And so that makes the template not reusable between both. You have to copy your template and just change delivery to workload, right? Oh, sorry, deliverable to workload. So I'd like to be able to resolve for that. And maybe it should be an alias so that you can specify the workload or the deliverable. They do have, workloads and deliverables do have different specs. Workload has env, whereas deliverable does not at this point. So there will be situations where you will only want to use a workload, for example. But then I wonder, I think that's probably the right thing for those, but I still think that we need to be able to make dynamically reusable templates because there's nothing different between the two. Why would we deploy two templates in a system if we can avoid it? Especially if you just want to be able to carte blanche it. Yes, the deliveries templates tend to live on a different cluster than on where the supply chain sits. But if you want them on the same one, that should work. So those are my thoughts on this thing.
Could this, as a workaround, be solved by some fancy YTT templating?
I don't know if we can check whether the value exists or not. If we can, we could do that. You choose one or the other. I think the easier workaround is to copy pasta, create two templates, a delivery template and a workload template. That's an easier workaround at this point. I would rather the solution not to, personally, not to throw even more YTT imperative content in.
Yeah, I don't disagree with like, it would be nice to have an alias or,
Yeah.
just, be able to make it reusable. I just was throwing out an idea.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the one example where I'm building a supply chain and delivery at the moment, and I would rather have the two templates, because there is another small issue too, which is that that template just uses the metadata name, and the delivery tends to also have the same name. The deliverable has the same name as the workload. So we get a name collision. The only solution at the moment would be, if you had a dried solution like this, is you would have to, when you generate the deliverable, call it workload name dash deliverable or something like that. And then that would be copied forward to the new stamped object. A few issues to deal with here.
Nick, I
I
think
guess
from
my only hesitation here is like, sorry, go ahead, Dan.
no, go for it. Go for it.
I guess my only hesitation, here is that we have like, it would be interesting to see some more use cases of where these templates collide between workload and delivery. Because right now we have one instance, and it'd be nice to dry that up, but it might be worth it to like see if we can come up with some other use cases before we start considering like whether or not this is something that we need to solve.
Sure. Well, for everyone's edification, the one use case is when you're pulling from a Git repository, so a source template, which is why I've put that as an example here too. That's a really obvious one.
Yeah, and to be fair, it's one that most people are going to run into, right?
I also suspect there will be duplication of smoke testing, certain types of tests that you use to validate in delivery. You might also use to validate in the supply chain first, but I don't have any hard examples of that right now.
Probably images as well, right? I think there's a push for using supply chains for images, and I could see that being used for both. I think from a UX perspective or like a user's perspective, like you wouldn't want to have to know, one versus the other, right? Like if it's the same template, it's going to only work the same way between both. Then it should just work.
I think it's important as an alias, because I think there's a lot of times where you just want to be very explicit, and that way our template will just obviously explode if you said workload.spec.env, right? Instead of telling us owner.spec.env doesn't exist, it would just simply say no workload here. And that would be useful. So in the templates where it's specifically for a particular type of chain, for want of a better word, then you use that specifically, and the owner is a reference that's the generic version. So the duck type, or the most common interface between the two. I just wanted to start the discussion. Please add notes to this if you have any strong feelings.
I do think Emily's suggestion of using YTT as a workaround for now is a good idea.
But I mean, that brings up a bigger discussion, right? Like, what is the future for YTT inside of supply chains and deliveries, right? Of this, like we're not, I mean, in the context of delivering things in a certain time frame, right? Like those kinds of workaround discussions are important. But if we want to make something, if we have our eyes on the longer term, which I think like these discussions should be, right? Like what are we doing long term with YTT?
Along those lines, can I ask a quick question before somebody gives an answer to that? Is there, how tied to YTT, how embedded in is it as a percentage? I mean, or a complexity to remove it, I guess, or a dependency? Does that make sense?
It's very light. We have we have enough abstraction that the choice between like YTT and the plain templating that we have are two little implementations that are called from the same base, which comes basically in with a set of inputs, known inputs, that you can get values for your interpolation, right? Yeah. So I mean, it's light in that sense. It could be replaced with something else. Our choice of YTT was the power it had to be structural over text, which can be really painful. Yeah, text interpolation in YAML,
Well,
very hard.
I hijacked Daniel's question, so so excited to get away from that.
It's the same question though, right? It's more like longer term. What like functionally, my understanding is like we get a lot with using YTT. It's more of a question of like, as an open source project, do we want to commit to using it and just double down? Or is this something that we want to like bridge the functionality gap with stuff to get us to where we're at with YTT and then go from there? So like, from my perspective, you know, it's more of an engineering discussion, right? It's like, do we want to continue to use it, double down, or what do y'all think?
I mean, YTT makes our lives simpler, right? If we went all in on YTT and scrapped our own JSON path templating recursiveness that we have going on, like we no longer have to solve that problem.
We obviously don't have enough users, but the current percentage of users using template versus YTT, it's like YTT, and then this is people using our templates. I use our templates when I write a template to get started, and then I always go to YTT by the end of it.
Yeah.
Controversial question. What about other templating?
That's not as controversial as name it. Name one that does as well structurally, and also supports the important things. Very important is conditional logic, looping logic.
I think I've quite used like the Go template from Helm Charts, and that's one I'm most familiar with, which does those. I mean that's just one that I can
Which is
think of.
non-structural. I mean, I think that's one of our criteria, and it's one that criteria is probably worth discussing separate from what implementation we use, right?
There was one other maybe thing that might be worth considering that though is adoption of how familiar people are using it. So it might make our lives easier, but is there a barrier to entry? Is somebody you have to learn YTT? Is somebody that's not familiar with YTT? I've had to scratch my head at it, I'll be honest. Not, and that's probably just because I haven't had the time to properly look at it. I don't mean to offend anybody, but and I am more familiar with Go templating because I've been using Helm charts. So I'm just wondering about the audience that's going to be using it and the adoption.
I think that there's no one offended. I think like as an engineer who had to look at it, I was like, oh, YTT is so it is hard to understand, but as you work with it, you go, I see why the choices exist, because this gives you a structural template. The problem with Go templates is that you then start to have to make sure your white space makes sense. And so that becomes frustrating, more so than I would just wish I could get some YAML in here and have it injected as an object rather than as a string, right? And that's where most of us land on that. I almost think that our templating should be replaced with Go templating, and then we'd have a comparison that actually makes more sense, that we could have users try one that's a very common idiom, which is Go templates, and one that is designed to improve the structural templating pains that you have, rather than the templating we have today, which is entirely unique. I mean, it's JSON path, but it's still entirely unique and very limited. I think that would give us a better A/B test of the community too.
I like that, Rash, a lot.
Yeah, I guess like that's what I was gonna say. Like, what do we need to get there to get to a point where we can make an intelligent decision one way or the other? So if it's like we need to support Go templating first to be able to say, okay, it's this versus that, then like it's not a decision we need to make today. I'm sure we could talk about it a lot, but like what do we need to make a step in a decision to make, or a step in the direction to make a decision here?
I think there's actually two decisions, right? There's like, one is what templating do we use? And then the other is, are we just going to rely on templating for all these different features that we want to support? Or is there a nicer experience that we can provide to users if we take that and make it a top level feature in Cartographer, right? And I think that top level feature support is going to be case by case. And because, yeah, if we can offer a better experience in Cartographer, I think we should do that. Because, you know, just shoving everything into templating gets really messy.
You're saying the templating is the easy way out design wise, right?
Yeah.
You're not wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Philosophically, should we be closing that functionality gap, right? Like that's the question, is like,
Yeah.
should we be, right? Or can we, like I was saying, double down on YTT? Like, in my opinion, YTT is pretty ugly in there, and like offering a nicer user experience would be better, but right. So
Yeah. I don't
But
think
why-
that
Sorry, go
pivoting
ahead.
to Golang templates would be like, I mean, it's like saying like, yeah, we get an apples to apples comparison because now we're just using two different templating engines. But like, you know, I don't think we want to go to something that's text-based. And, you know, one of the things that our baked approach has is that it is very simple, and it does work structurally as well. You know, if we, you know, the other side of the coin is could we add the things that give us the, you know, the looping constructs and conditional constructs of YTT, and then maybe we have something that's not as ugly to look at as YTT, and maybe just covers just the functions that we want. I don't know. It's obviously more investment in design.
Yeah,
I-
and we're required, I mean,
sorry.
like, the amount of docs that would be required for building these features in is slightly terrifying, and like maintaining that, or else like shoveling that off to YTT where the features already exist.
I think the suggestion is not so much like putting it in some other template solution that is custom rolled, but structurally that the whole thing is designed such that you don't need a template that has conditions and loops.
Yeah.
Right. So that it's more of a, I declare that there's just going to be this thing that is repeated rather than I write something imperative. I think that's what we were talking about, right? That the idea is that we avoid a lot of this imperative stuff and go to declarative. My problem is that everyone who's talks about it like lofty ideals and has absolutely nothing concrete to present, which is why we have YTT templates today. If that's not unreasonable to say. So I think the lofty ideals are things we can approach while also giving people an out when they need to get their product to work. And that's why we chose YTT, because it's there and it does it structurally.
And that's how we have the two solutions too right now, because we're like, okay, lofty ideals and YTT, which, you know, I arguably has all the features, but then, you know, I think it's important to point out that maybe the user experience is not the most ideal.
So it sounds like there's quite a few different parts to it. What's the next approach? Is there an issue for it already? What would be the best approach to kind of start dumping some thoughts and tracking this? Because it sounds like it's not going to be a solve overnight kind of a thing. And there's lots of thoughts and lots of maybe looking, experimenting, or research that needs to be done.
it should probably be an RFC, right? Like this should be something that is a bigger discussion.
I think that we have to identify those use cases. So the repeats are about things where you have more than one thing you need to configure. I'm just going to jump straight to my solution just to try to describe what I think should happen here is that we can template any object out that we want to. So there should be an object that's well designed for dealing with this problem, which is, hey, I've got a bunch of resources I need to write config for. So we have a config template. The config template should come up with that by using a sub resource that's designed to omit that. And then you should not need a YTT template for that. So that's being able to do a looping solution of some kind, all right? It should be, I think it should be aware of the input. So if it's for a service, a list of services that you want to be able to attach to, then it should know about services and generate some result, which means that we need to either work with the community or find solutions that already do that. That say, take a list of services and create some config you can append. And then the other one is conditional logic, and that's way more complicated, and I haven't got any clues about that one. But the conditionals tend to be based on the fact that you will produce different intermediate artifacts based on how you started out. I don't know how to better describe the scenario, but
Yeah, it's almost like it feels like you want to have something like, that recursive, like templating nesting part. And then like, I don't know if you folks remember much or ever want to remember much about XSLT, but the way you could say, well, I want to apply those templates and this is the selecting filter that I want on it, right? And then if you could have those filters, then that kind of gets you away from having like conditionals, because, you can just say this is the thing I want to filter for when I'm applying here. But I don't know.
I think the underlying problem is that there's all these different use cases. We need to tackle them individually, and it's going to be a much larger discussion to see if we can come up with something that's cohesive and that makes sense for each individual use case. But until that happens, until we can identify all those, then I think YTT will just be there for a while, or some templating will be there for a while.
I think logical templating will be there forever. That would be my recommendation, is that we don't ever think we're going to lose it, because I think people will always need a new solution out the gate that hasn't been solved with a CRD and with controllers. And I think it behooves us to support that in perpetuity, because that, although YTT is complex, that is immediately a lower barrier to entry than, well, you need your own controller and CRD to support this problem, right? But one thing we could do to sort of like separate the concerns a little bit is actually something that's been brought up before, which is produce a CRD for YTT itself. So then there's no longer our problem. It's just that's the default one that you can use in a config template. Create me a YTT, and that could be an easy proposal to separate the concerns, and then let someone who wants Golang templates to go and do that and create their own CRD for that as well.
Yeah.
I've added an item to the action item there. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
I don't even know if we want to make this one RFC, maybe like one for each use case, right?
I also like to get actual like user features, like people from the community or otherwise that say like we actually need this and we don't want to do it via YTT before we keep investing in our own templating.
I think that's reasonable. Like this is clearly a longer discussion, right? And like I think in my mind this is like a medium to long term thing that we need to figure out. Like for now, YTT is here, right? And
Yeah.
so let's, our community usage is obviously minimal, right? So as we grow, right, like these are things that we can rally around in terms of like should we address the functional gap to what YTT can do natively with Cartographer? Like maybe, I don't know. Let's see that. So like that makes a lot of sense to me.
It's going to be a grand design for sure. It's like, I wouldn't be surprised if many RFCs get created and killed before we find something that we think is worth.
I still want to address something that James has said there, though, about adoption, right? And comfort. I think at the very least, we could explain in the documentation, welcome to your first YTT template. It doesn't have to look as overwhelming as you think it here. Here's the boilerplate. This is how you get the values, right? And the boilerplate is, this is how you pull values because you need to use this line, and this is how you reference them. It is pretty straightforward, but if it's a little hand-holdy document, a bit of documentation, then maybe people won't be worried about it. And then the other thing is in our example to make sure that we over-explain, because I believe our example carries YTT in it, and certainly will soon, because I believe we're putting in an example that uses choices for GitOps behavior. So we should over-explain in that to a user who's reading the example, just what the YTT is, even though we can say, here's your YTT documentation. Let's just explain why we're doing it the way we're doing it. And that might just ease people into that adoption and not throw them for a loop.
Got it. Sounds great. So the action item will be for now to create the issues for these topics, right? So make sure to add your name if you want to volunteer in doing so. And we'll make sure that users out there, people from the community, will provide their feedback for the discussion. It looks like a really big discussion, so it's important, and we love to have feedbacks from the users out there. That's great. Thank you all. Okay, any other item that you may want to bring here? Okay, that's it. So thanks so much for your time. See you next week.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.